Chapter 4 The Inconveniences of Following a Pretty Girl in the Streets at Night. Gringoire decided to follow the gypsy girl. He had seen her and her goat turn down the Rue de la Cotellerie. Why not? He said to himself. Gringoire, a practical philosopher familiar with the streets of Paris, had observed that nothing is more conducive to reverie than following a pretty woman without knowing where she is going. There is in this voluntary abdication of free will, in this submission of one's fantasy to another's, a mixture of fantastic independence and blind obedience, a certain intermediate between slavery and freedom, which appealed to Gringoire, whose mind was essentially mixed, and indecisive, and complex, holding the middle between extremes, constantly suspended between all human propensities, and neutralizing one by the other. He compared himself with satisfaction to the tomb of Mohammed, attracted in contrary direction by two lodestones, and hesitating eternally between the top and the bottom, between the roof and the pavement, between the fall and the ascension, between the zenith and the nadir. If Gringoire had lived in our day, how justly he would have kept to the middle, between the classic and the romantic. But he was not primitive enough to live 300 years, and that's a pity. His absence leaves a void which, today, is sorely recognized. Moreover, there is nothing that better disposes a man to follow pedestrians through the streets, and especially female ones, which Gringoire readily did, than not knowing where to sleep. Therefore, pensively, he walked behind the girl, who was quickening her step, causing her cunning little goat to trot along too, as she saw the townspeople reaching home and the taverns closing, the only public places that had been open that day. After all, his thoughts ran, she must have lodging somewhere. The gypsies are warm-hearted, who knows? And there was in the ellipsis which followed his mental reticence certain rather pleasing ideas. Meanwhile, as he passed groups of belated burghers closing their doors, he caught scraps of their conversation which broke the chain of his pleasing hypotheses. Now it was two old men accosting each other. "Master Thibault Funicle, do you know it's cold?" Gringoire had known that ever since winter had begun. Yes, Master Boniface Dizome. Are we going to have a winter like 3 years ago, in '80, when wood cost 8 sols a load? Bah, it was nothing, Master Thibault, compared to the winter of 1407, when there was frost from Saint Martin's Day to Candlemas, and the cold was so bitter that the pen of the register of the Parliament froze at every third word, even in the great chamber, and that interrupted the recording of judgments, I can tell you." Farther on, there were two lady neighbors at their windows, holding candles that flickered in the fog. "Has your husband told you of the accident, Mademoiselle La Boudraque?" "No, what happened, Mademoiselle Turcan?" "Master Gilles Godin's horse," Godin was a notary at the Châtelet, "was startled by the Flemings in their procession, and knocked down Master Filippo Avriot, a Celestine lay brother." "In truth?" "Yes, really. An ordinary horse, too. That's rather too bad. If it had been a cavalry horse, what?" And the windows were shut again, but Gringoire had lost completely the thread of his thoughts. Luckily he picked it up again quickly and pieced his ideas together, assisted by the gypsy and Jolly, who still walked on in front of him. These two charming creatures, whose delicate fingers, small feet, and pleasing manners he admired, while almost confusing them in his contemplation, regarding them both as young girls, interesting on account of their intelligence and their mutual affection, then thinking them both goats because of their lightness, agility, and grace. Meanwhile the streets were rapidly becoming darker and lonelier. Curfew had sounded long ago, and now it was only at long intervals that a person passed on the pavement, or a light was to be seen in some window. Following the gypsy, Gringoire had become lost in this inextricable maze of alleys, courts, and dead-end streets which surround the ancient sepulchre of the Holy Innocents, and which resemble a skein of yarn entangled by a kitten. "Illogical streets, I say," muttered Gringoire, lost in these thousand windings which always kept coming back to their beginnings, but through which the girl, without hesitating and ever increasing her pace, followed a route that seemed familiar to her. For his own part, he would not have had the remotest idea where he was, had he not observed, at a turn in the street, that octagonal mass known as the Pillory of Les Halles, the perforated top of which traced its dark outline against a lighted window in the Rue Verdelet. During the short time that the girl had been aware of his following her, she had several times turned around nervously. Once, too, she had stopped suddenly, had taken advantage of a ray of light that shone through the half-open door of a bakery to scrutinize him attentively from head to foot. Then, before she passed on, Gringoire saw her make that little pouting face which he had already remarked. This same puckered pretty face gave Gringoire some food for thought. Thereon certainly was registered disdain and mockery. Consequently, he lowered his head, counting the paving stones, and followed the girl at a farther distance. Then, just after she turned into a street which took her for a moment out of his sight, he heard her give a piercing scream. He quickened his steps. The street was dark, except for a wick dipped in oil, which was flickering in an iron cage at the base of a statue of the Virgin, near the corner of the street. This enabled Gringoire to discern the gypsy struggling in the arms of two men, who were trying to muffle her cries. The poor little goat, frightened, lowered its horns and bleated. "Here's a gentleman of the watch!" cried Gringoire, as he advanced bravely. One of the men who was holding the girl turned toward him. It was the formidable Quasimodo. Gringoire did not flee, but neither did he advance. Quasimodo came up to him, and, with a backhanded blow, sent him reeling 4 or 5 paces across the pavement. Immediately the hunchback disappeared into the darkness, carrying the young girl, who was folded over his arm like a silken scarf. His companion followed, and, bleating plaintively, the poor goat ran along. "Murder! Murder!" screamed the unfortunate gypsy. "Halt! You villains, let that wench go!" thundered a cavalryman, who suddenly appeared from a neighboring cross-street. It was a captain of the archers with the king's ordnance, armed cap à pie, with his sabre in his hand. He snatched the gypsy from the arms of the amazed Quasimodo, laid her across his saddle, and just at the moment when the redoubtable hunchback, having recovered from his surprise, was rushing upon him to seize his prey a second time, 15 or 16 archers, who were following close upon their captain, arrived, brandishing their broadswords. This was a detachment making its night rounds, by order of Monsieur Robert d'Estouteville, keeper of the Provosty of Paris. Quasimodo was surrounded, seized, and bound. He bellowed, he foamed, he bit, and, had it been daylight, no doubt his visage alone, rendered yet more hideous by his rage, would have put to flight the detachment. But the night had disarmed him of his most formidable weapon, his ugliness. The gypsy sat up gracefully in the officer's saddle, placed both her hands on the young man's shoulders, and looked at him intently for a few seconds, as if charmed by his handsome face, and grateful for the timely rescue. Then, speaking first, using her most dulcet tones, she said to him, Monsieur le gendarme, what is your name?" "Captain Phoebus de Chateaupeur, at your service, my fair one," said the officer, saluting. "Thank you," said she. And when Captain Phoebus was curdling his mustache à la Bourguignon, she slid from the saddle like an arrow falling to the ground. She fled, faster than a bolt of lightning. "Nombril du pape!" exclaimed the captain, while he supervised the tightening of Quasimodo's bonds. "I would rather have kept that wench." "Why, captain," said one of the gendarmes, "aren't you satisfied? The linnet is flown, but we've made sure of the bat."